Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. My girlfriend called the other day and told me that her new name was Spinal Column. I just told her I'd call her back. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Total Domination from Phalanx Games.
Ich groll nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht, ewig verlorenes Lieb, ewig verlorenes Lieb, ich groll nicht, ich groll nicht, wie du auch strahlst in Diamantenpracht. Es fällt kein Strahl in deines Herzens Nacht, das weiß ich längst. Ich grolle nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht.
We'll get back to the review in just a moment. I want to take a minute to ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about history, books on history, military history. I even post some of my lectures for my classes on there. Please check that out. Please subscribe to that channel. And now, back to the review.
In Total Domination from Phalanx Games, 2 to 4 players take on the various belligerents in World War II as they attempt to defeat their enemies and claim victory over the globe. Now, the game board here is two-sided. You can play in kind of a global alternate version of the map, which has kind of arrows pointing everywhere, or you can play in this kind of square map, which almost looks like a Monopoly board with the various spaces along the sides of the board. They represent various geographic areas on Earth, and they have lines connecting each other, but there are also various kind of smaller arrows which connect certain regions on the board with other regions. Now, the game can be played for 2 to 4 players, in which each of the 4 players has their own kind of faction that they control, or you can play with the 2-player version where it's just the Axis versus the Allies, and kind of the decks are mixed. That's the way we're going to look at it. Now, the 4 factions here you have are the Western powers. Now, this initially is Britain and France. It can be expanded to include the United States. You have the Soviet Union, which can be expanded to include China, and then, of course, you have, as the Axis, Germany and Japan. Now, each faction is going to have its own player board in front of it. Now, these are identical player boards which represent various technological abilities during the game. It's going to say kind of essentially how far your units can move. It's going to say how they can eliminate other units on the board. It's also going to have some various other information like that as well. But critically, that will be intimately tied to the card play during this game. Now, there's going to be different round markers which illustrate how many cards all of the factions get each round. There are a couple of factions, 39 and I think 41, where Germany and then Japan will get an extra card. Now, when you're playing the 2-player, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to mix all the cards they get together, and then you're eventually going to have to get rid of one. But what you do is when you get those cards, you don't just get the cards, you gauge in a draft. You're going to select a number of cards, set them aside, and give them to the next player. They'll do the same thing. You'll go back and forth till all the cards but one are eliminated, and that's the one you will get rid of. Now, the order, the sequence of play of the factions is somewhat different. Initially, Germany is going to go first. By halfway through the game, Russia will go first. But you're going to go ahead and track that sequence over the course of the game. And then when you actually play the game, you're going to have, of course, your hand of cards. And your cards are very important to how you play. Now, your cards are going to have a lot of different information on them. First of all, a card up in the top left is going to have its OP points, its operational points. Now, these are points that you can spend to do things with your faction during your turn. You're also going to have in the top right some kind of research that you can engage in to help you over the course of the game. More on that later. And then you will also have at the bottom of the card an event. Now, the events are color-coded to specific factions. So anybody can play the card for anything up top, but if you want to play that event on the bottom, you can only do that if you belong to that specific faction. Now, what you're doing on your turn then is you're playing one of your cards, and if you play it for the OP points, if you play it for the operational points, what you can do then is look on your player board. It will tell you essentially how much it costs to deploy a unit. Now, you can only deploy units, and these are, of course, your tanks, which are armies, your fleets, and of course, your air units in some circumstances. As far as your armies and your fleets go, you have to go ahead and place them in one of your home locations which has either a shipyard or a factory. That means that's where they are deployed. Now, you also have to pay so many OPs to move one of your units on the board, to move a fleet, an army, etc., etc. You have to pay the price to move them, and then you have to pay a price to eliminate adjacent units. So if you're next to a unit, you can essentially pay the cost and operational points to remove an enemy unit from the board. Now, each space on the board has certain properties to it. Each faction has 3 or 4 home territories, which are color coded to them. But every space on the board, be they from a faction or be they neutral, has some kind of victory point value, and these are stars. If you occupy that, you get the victory point for it. Now, with regarding your home territories, you don't have to have your own units there in order to get those victory points. But in any other space on the board, if you want the victory points for it, you have to have a unit in that location. Now, units, whether they are fleets or armies, they can spend the appropriate amount to destroy the unit of the appropriate type that is adjacent to them. It doesn't matter, as I say, if they're fleet or an army. But the first unit to move into certain spaces must either be a fleet or an army. This is clearly delineated by the arrows on the tracks around the board. Now, as I say, you can do other things with the cards. If you have the card events, sometimes this lets you deploy units. It'll let you, for free, deploy a tank or a fleet or even an airplane. Now, air power works a little bit differently here. Air power cannot hold territories, but what you can do is, by positioning aircraft, it can actually use its power to destroy units up to 2 spaces away. However, once it does that, it can no longer be used that round. And also, critically, too, you have to destroy armies before you destroy fleets, and armies and fleets before you destroy air power. Now, as I say, the cards themselves, the events have some very specific things here. For instance, you can deploy armies, fleets, and air power at no cost. Just by playing the card, you can go ahead and deploy them. Some of the events will give you additional OPs. So, like, for instance, maybe it's a 6 OP card, but if it's with your faction, you can get 7 OPs. Some cards will also allow movement. You can essentially do movement. Now, when you do movement, it's not just necessarily from one space to the next, but you can go through any adjacent chain of units you have to the front lines. That's what constitutes a movement. Some cards, again, let you do that for free. Now, you may get a puppet event. If you play a card for its puppet event, that allows you to place 2 armies on the board in any conquered nation of your faction. Now, you can play a science card. A science card essentially allows you to move up on the science track, and critically, it allows you to take a card from the discard pile and place it face down for its technology. Now, when you're playing cards for technology, that's what you do. Essentially, you place that card off to the side. Now, at the end of the round, during the administration phase, you can go ahead, you can look at that technology and fulfill it. Usually what that means is you're going to be moving your blocks from some areas to others. In some cases, you'll be moving blocks from one area toward the cost of destroying enemies or deploying your units or moving your units. And what this means is then it will be cheaper going forward to move, deploy, attack with your armies, your navies. But there's various other things that can kick into play. Espionage gives you, abilities to look at other players' decks. There's all sorts of things that are going on with some of these other abilities. Now, in technology, you can also research rockets, the V1, the V2, or the nuclear weapons, which allow you to discard a card of a certain point value in order to eliminate cards from your opponent's hand. Now, another event is influence. Essentially, you're placing influence cards out there. These are influence over neutral nations, like Brazil or Portugal or Spain, and you're going to essentially put those on the table. Now, as long as that's on the table, you get a point for it. But if another player plays a similar card with a similar flag on it for a greater amount of points, then they can essentially trump your card, and then they would get the points, and you would lose the points for your influence over that country. Now, for the Western Allies and the Soviets, there are chances to bring the United States and China into the war. Essentially, the United States and China have their own kind of decks, which are just placed off to in the middle of the table there. And what's going to happen is you can engage in Lend-Lease, meaning you play a card, essentially you burn a card, move the marker one over on the Lend-Lease track, and you can take this card and set it to the side as a reserve, and then later you can shuffle that into your hand, which gives you, again, either more operational points or abilities from that new potential ally. Now, once the Lend-Lease tracks are all the way over, those faction cards, as I say, in the United States and China, they get shuffled into the regular deck, and they will be in play from that point forward. So players are essentially going back and forth. They are drawing cards. They are using the OPs, the events. They are trying to get science. They are putting units on the board, deploying them. They are moving them. They are attacking with them, taking enemy units off the board. They are gaining points, and they are losing points. Now, if the Allies reach a certain point threshold, they will win the game. But if the Axis can manage to make it all the way through the end of round 1945 without losing, then they win. Total domination. Now, as I say, there's a lot more going on in this game. There's espionage, there's intelligence, there's things like radar and arsenal and all sorts of things you're doing with the technology and all sorts of cards you're playing throughout the game. So there's a ton going on here, and there's a lot of variance going on here. Now, right at the beginning, let me say this. So I've just played this game with a 2-player. Ray and I just played it 2-player. I really get a sense this game is intended for 4 players. You can play it 2-player, but it feels like you are playing a variant. It feels like you are playing a workaround, because it feels very much like this should be a 4-player game. Now, what I mean by that is the game, the sequence is not always clear. I wish there was a better sequence track to keep track of whose turn it is, because we found we would both keep getting confused about, okay, no, wait, is it this faction's turn or is it this faction's turn? And it would have been nice. I mean, it's not clear on the track they provide, especially where it changes from Germany being first to the Soviet Union being first. So I wish that was a little better there. One also gets the sense that the interaction between the factions is probably a pretty fun part of the game. And of course, you don't get that when you are playing 2-player here. But also too, like France can kind of flip sides. I think Italy can too. So there's a lot of other things going on here. Then there's partisans too. I didn't even mention partisans can pop up and cause problems. So there's just a ton going on in this game. But the game can feel very mathy too, just for how you're spending those OP points. Okay, well I want to go here, but I can't move and then attack. And if I go there, there's a lot of kind of mathy stuff going on here, which I'm not a huge fan of generally. So I have some caveats with the game, and some things, some concepts, some ideas weren't as clear, and weren't. I felt like the rulebook didn't address them as well as I wanted them to. Like air power, we were scratching our heads for air power for a long time. I think I went on Board Game Geek and was asking about air power because it wasn't quite clear to me. So there's some concepts that just, like I say, I think needed to be a little better explained and a little tighter there. Now, having said all of that, with all of those criticisms, let me just say I think this is actually a pretty good game. I wish it was a little more streamlined, but again, it's pretty good. I like the development of science. I like how important science is in this game. It seems to me like you really want to get the cost for deploying and attacking and moving tanks and armies down as fast as you can, or fleets down as fast as you can, because those things are so critical and so important to victory here. Well, and just your operations in general. It's a card-driven game with the OPs, with the events, which I really liked a lot. And again, I like how you play the science there. But there's other things and other avenues to do. But sometimes too, even with the events, it seems like there's a point where you just want to burn. You just feel like you need to burn the OPs, because it just seems you need to do that, even though you'd like to play it for some of these other interesting things. That's not the whole game, but it seems like there's good chunks of the games. I just need those OPs. I need those OPs. But that's true, I think you could say, of most card-driven games, right? There's so many fun things you want to do, but sometimes you just need the operation points. So I like this game. I thought it was fun. I'll play it again. It's going into the collection. I do hope we get and some kind of larger FAQ or errata out there And I hope maybe too we can even see just some more streamlining of the rules in time, because it's a good game. I just do have some caveats here. With all those caveats, I'm going to say try it before you buy it, but I'm going to make it a very positive try it before you buy it. I actually think if you're a fan of World War II games, if you don't mind deterministic combat, because it is deterministic combat, no die rolls here, I think you'll get a kick out of it. I can tell you right now, this game is not going to be for everyone. It will not be for everyone. But I think for a certain kind of gamer here, because it kind of feels kind of Euro-y. It's not, I wouldn't call it a Euro game, but there's a very strong Euro element here. And so if you're a gamer that maybe likes a bit of that in a war game, I think you will really enjoy Total Domination. So as I say, try it before you buy it, but I really like it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us here on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We'd ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd also ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to please check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history, books on history, fun things like that. I even post some of my lectures on that channel. It would mean a lot to me if you would check out that channel and subscribe. And, of course, please leave a thumb to this video on Board Game Geek. And if you are a fan of the channel, I'd ask you to go ahead and click on the Super Thanks button here on the YouTube page and leave a tip. I just want to take a minute to thank the person in the comments who told me the definition of the word plethora. It means a lot.
Left arc, still at 2 to 6.
Yes!
A little scout.
Yes!